will we ever see a day again in the near future where there's this hearty debate on floors on these big bills that are going through?
Well, and much of the debate is just performative, right?
Yeah.
I mean, anything that's in the traditional policy, I would say partisan policy realm, you can kind of forget about bipartisan approaches, right? Unless it's something very creative. I mean, I can tell you how often Speaker Pelosi's office has reached out to mine on anything.
How many?
Zero.
Yeah.
Or any substantive effort to gain traction. Now, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was negotiated between 10 Republican senators, 10 Democratic senators. There was some consultation with the Problem Solvers Caucus that I'm a part of, the bipartisan group, but that was very much the exception. I really look for opportunities where there is some bipartisan potential, right? So
sure.
I was the Republican Republican lead in the House. The chair of the House Rules Committee, Jim McGovern, was the Democratic lead on a bipartisan bicameral bill to reform war powers, arms export control, emergency powers, called the National Security Reform and Accountability Act, that I'm really proud of. Mm-hmm. But that gets into kind of a weird middle ground between the parties where you can have a consensus arise that's much more about legislative prerogative and checking executive power than it is a political question in a partisan context. I think it was tremendously frustrating. And you really saw this with the American Rescue Plan early on. The COVID relief packages prior to the American Rescue Plan have been extremely bipartisan. They'd gone through kind of almost an old-fashioned style process. And I remember reaching out, because the Problem Solvers Caucus was trying to do this, reaching out very early on and saying, all right, you want to do a really big bill, this is going to take some time to negotiate. What do we need right now in late January, early February of 2021? We need money for testing, we need money for vaccine distribution. Let's have a standalone bill on that. We can get 90% support, good, strong, bipartisan, we'll kind of continue that. And Pelosi told us, pound sand, right? No, yeah, obviously that's good and bipartisan, which is why we want to attach it to the package that you're going to be voting against, because we're doing it through budget reconciliation and cutting you out of the process.
Right.
So there's a pretty staggering degree of cynicism. I mean, even where, it's costless, but because it'll be painful for the other side, we emphasize that. And in the minority in the House, they've slowly done away. This has been a trend over time, but even in this session, it was kind of the most extreme iteration. The House rules that Speaker Pelosi put out basically negated the minority's ability to be a check on anything.
Sure.
Really kind of a railroad of the minority's ability to your point, offer floor amendments, but even some of the motions to recommit and some of these procedural moves where they had been a check and frankly, when the Republicans were in the majority, that was done away with as well. And so, I can have an impact around legislation kind of on those margins. I can have an impact when it comes to trying to derive and focus attention, on the district and in constituent relations. Certainly our district office doing fantastic work on, helping people interact with the federal government. But overall, both, especially in the minority, but even as an individual member, a lot of the power that used to be there has been whittled away, consolidated with leadership, and specifically consolidated with majority leadership.
The Full Exposure Podcast is brought to you by Dr. Peter Hahn and University of Michigan Health West, in appreciation of the creative and artistic visionaries who enrich our lives through cultural connections.